Good to be back with you as always, and give me energy and make me feel good about what we're doing in this country. And this is an important juncture we're at as a country. And I hope that all of Guyana in the last few weeks have come together as I think we haven't done before in a long time. We had in Parliament a motion which was unanimously supported by the government and the opposition, drafted by the government and the opposition, which stood firm on Guyana's territorial integrity. In our history in Parliament, that has happened 4 times, from the 1960s to now. So it isn't often that the Parliament and the opposition agree on things and become recorded, but on the issue of territorial integrity, 4 times since we became independent, we have had such motions defending and standing up in a united way for Guyana and our territory. We are in very special times in that all across Guyana we've seen school children making a map of Guyana and making it perfectly in some cases, with their uniforms, with their bodies standing in attention of the chain of unity, of the flag, all the symbols that make us who we are. But the important thing is not only the children have a sense of who they are, that Essequibo belongs to us, but also that we as a people are united on this one issue. We may not be united on a lot of issues. We may have differences of views. That's all right. Every country has it. But we are united regardless of what our color is, our religion, where we live, what language we speak, what gender, that we know one thing, and we hold one thing to be true, and that is that the boundaries of Guyana are sacrosanct, and they were concluded as the full, final, and perfect agreement and solution in 1899. My friends, this story is a long, long story. The story of Guyana and Venezuela border issue is 124 years. Long before some of you were born, some of your parents were born, and even maybe some of your grandparents were born. Story long, 124 years from the time that the 1899 arbitral awards had the full, final, and perfect solution to the boundaries of Guyana. Venezuela had liberated itself from Spain as a colony. We were still a colony, British Guyana, under the British, the former colonizers of Guyana, the Dutch, the French, then the British. And at that time, Guyana's boundaries that had been done in the 1840s took in part of Venezuela, which is today's Venezuela, and part of Brazil, today's Brazil. And the Venezuelans were very upset about this after independence, after they, led by Simón Bolívar, won their independence. And they went to the Americans, and the Americans did not like these European powers running around South America, gobbling up land. So the United States supported Venezuela in the 1890s that there was land that belonged to them. So in 1897, the tribunal was set up because, by the way, the United States and Britain almost went to war on this issue of the boundaries between Guyana and Venezuela. And for 2 years they sat and they went through all the maps and the archives and the historical records, and they determined the boundaries of Venezuela and British Guyana, which would become Guyana. And we lost some territory, and Venezuela, for 60 years after that, agreed to the landmark, the boundary. The official map had the map as it was in the 1899 agreement, tribunal. They got into law, and when they had to do their boundaries with Brazil, they stuck to the 1899 agreement with Ghana to reach the trijunction period, trijunction, which is where Brazil, Ghana, and Venezuela meet. That was in the 1920s. So it is when the story, I think, has to be told, because sometimes I don't think people know all the story, is that one of the junior lawyers in the tribunal of Venezuela, called Municipality, wrote a letter 49 years after the agreement was made, the tribunal, stating that there had been some broker, some deal struck between some of the commissioners on the tribunal to take away Venezuela's land and give it to Guyana. That led to a group of experts that met for hundreds and hundreds of hours but could not find one piece of evidence to show how the deal was made, where it was made, and by whom was it made to take away land that Venezuela said Escribo belonged to them. And that began the next 60 years, the next 64 years. So the first 60 years, they stuck to the agreement. The next 60 years, 67 years, they changed. And this because we were becoming an independent country. And Escribo was thought to be very rich in natural resources. And of course, there are other parts of the history of this dispute that related to Guyana, in that the British and the Americans didn't want Cherry Dragon to be the father of independence. They didn't trust him, and therefore, you know some of the things that happened historically in order to make sure that Dragon would never be the person who brought independence and raised the arrowhead. But these are part of the history in which the European powers and the Americans played an interesting role. But what is important is that in that whole period leading up to independence, the British and the Americans and the Venezuelans decided, because Venezuela was demanding that before Guyana get independence, this piece of land, Escribo, must be hived off and given to them and thrown away, and did not respect the 1899 award. In order to have peace and normalcy with the transition for Guyana to independence, the Geneva Agreement was crafted between the British, the Americans, and the Venezuelans, not Guyanese. No Guyanese was in that group. And so they crafted the 1966 Geneva Agreement just before we got our independence. And the Geneva Agreement said, look, this is a dispute between two countries, and that we must design methods of how they could resolve it by peaceful means. And the Geneva Agreement points out what are the options and what are possibilities, including the International Court of Justice, going through the Secretary General of the United Nations. And so that was agreed to, in the Guyana Parliament, prior to independence, agreed to abide by the 1966 Geneva Agreement when we would become independent. So it would be legally binding on us as a freed and independent nation. And so from then on, the options of the Geneva Agreement were called up from time to time. The first one was the Mixed Commission, which was again to go back and look at the maps and the letters of the 1800s and the letters of the 1600s and the 1700s to find out, try to ascertain the boundaries. Again, Venezuela's claims could not be substantiated. They could not prove one piece of paper to show that the tribunal had been unfair, had acted improperly, or corrupt in any way to cheat Venezuela out of land that they wanted. So the Mixed Commission went through a couple of years, failed, did nothing. Then there was a period nothing happened. And then you have what is called the Good Officers period, which was 27 years of those 67 years, in which the Secretary General would appoint an outstanding eminent person which would meet with representatives of the Venezuelans and Guyanese to look at what they call soft issues, trade, good neighborliness, joint projects to try to reduce the temperature, but also to try to deal with a working relationship. The good officers went nowhere for 27 years. And in 2014, when they seized the ship off the coast of Guyana and took the ship into their waters, and this is a ship that was doing oil exploration, the Guyana government in 2014 decided to write the Secretary General saying that we need to go to the International Court of Justice. The then Secretary General said to the two countries, met the two countries, and said, give one more chance. One more chance. So each time the 1960 agreement is invoked. And so Guyana agreed for peace, 2017, to go into what was called the enhanced mediation process. And that went on for a year with a special envoy chosen by the Secretary General, who at this time now was Ban Ki-moon, and handing over shortly after to the new Secretary General, who was Guterres, who you see on the television now. NIDA, who was the appointed person, came back and said to the Secretary General, it's not working. There's nothing's going to happen. So Guyana had already put on the table the desire to go to the International Court of Justice. And so in 2018, the Secretary General agreed that the only recourse next was the International Court of Justice, in which we approached and put our memorial, put our arguments in. And my friend the mayor said, this is a victory, the first victory. No, the victory on Friday is the third victory, sir. The first victory was when the International Court of Justice ruled that it had the right to the jurisdiction to listen to our case. What was our case about? Our case is saying to the International Court of Justice that to examine the Venezuelan claim that the Arbitral Tribunal of 1899 is null and void. To examine that claim, because we know they don't have evidence. All these years, 124 years, they cannot produce evidence that Essequibo is theirs. And so we went to the case and debated why the court should have jurisdiction over this issue, and we won. That's the first victory. The second victory was when Venezuela went last year and said, we do not accept that the International Court of Justice has jurisdiction over this case. So the ICJ said, come and argue. So they came and they appealed, the ICJ, and the 2023 April, the ICJ rejected the appeal by the Venezuelans that the International Court of Justice had no jurisdiction to hear the case. That's number 2 victory. Number 3 victory is what happened on Friday. Maduro says we must stick to the 1966 agreement. And we are. We have done that all the time. But he wants us to give up the International Court of Justice. And he wants bilaterals to then let us decide, well, you have this creek and you have this piece of grass and you have that tree. No, we're not doing it. It's 124 years. We have a tribunal that says in 1899, this is the final perfect solution on the boundaries between Guyana and Venezuela. And so on Friday, we've gone to the court again, the International Court of Justice, based on the referendum that Venezuela and Maduro set up for tomorrow, December 3rd. We don't wish to interfere in any country's referendum. That's a democratic right. But you're going to have a referendum in your country saying you can take my country. That cannot be allowed. That is not international law. So you can have a referendum in your country and says that everyone must wear, a certain color, or they can agree to amendments to their constitution. That's their business. But they cannot, in the 5 questions, one of them says we don't accept the International Court of Justice. Two, the others, the one relating to Guyana, particularly to do with annexation, and saying that we will now become, we will become a state of Venezuela, and that they will offer us identity as Venezuelan citizens. And what do we say as Guyanese? No way! No way! We will string bury here. And that is Reagan State. So what we have seen happen, particularly from September, but I'll tell you that whenever there's a rise in the Venezuelan border issue, it's when Venezuela has trouble internally. And it's usually around election time. So my army friend and my colleague and Prime Minister knows, having been in the army, whenever there are elections in Venezuela and they have some issues, then you start hearing about Esquivel and how Esquivel belongs to them. They use that as a way to galvanize support of their people around whoever the leader is. The ruling on Friday says very clearly, and I'll read it, this is a phrase, the International Court of Justice says, pending a final decision with this, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela shall refrain from taking any action which would modify the situation that currently prevails in the territory in dispute, whereby the Cooperative Republic of Guyana administers and exercise control over that area. In other words, the court prohibited Venezuela, is prohibiting Venezuela from annexing or trespassing upon Guyanese territory or taking any action, regardless of the outcome of the referendum on December 3rd, that would alter the status quo in which Guyana administers and controls the Esquivel region as an integral part of its sovereign territory under the Arbiter Award of 1899. Well, what did the Venezuelan government do? They have been misinforming their people that they won the case of the ICJ, that Guyana couldn't stop the referendum. We didn't ask to stop the referendum. We asked that the referendum in its current form be amended so it does not deal with Guyana's territory. We also asked the court to tell Venezuela to refrain from any actions based on the referendum to interfere with our sovereignty. But they've been misinforming the people and creating a situation that is unstable. But you know us too. What have we been doing? We, as all the speakers before, have said that we are peaceful people. And it's true. But don't let Guyanese man lose his beans. Don't let Guyanese get out of control. We are peaceful people, yes. We don't want to have fights. We don't want to fight anybody. Our quarrel is not with the Venezuelan people. The Venezuelan people, from the time they're born, are shown a map that shows the Zone de Reclamación, which is Esquiva, as it's called. So we don't have beef with the Venezuelan people. We have beef with the Venezuelan authorities for 124 years who have claimed land. And those of you who have seen the Venezuelan map, Venezuela is a very large country. I think Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela are the largest countries in South America. What they want? Why they want more? Why they want more? And that's where the issue becomes now more modern. Not just we're talking a story of 124 years. We're talking a story now of 2023, 2015 to now. Where Guyana, you have to remember Venezuela has been the 5th largest producer of oil in the world. But because of poor management, they've been losing, and that's what led to the economic hardships in Venezuela, where 30,000 people have come here to seek a better life. Large percentage of them are Guyanese. But there are over 6 million people who have left Venezuela, who have scattered and gone to Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Chile, Miami, because of the economic hardships. We can't answer for Maduro and what they've done. But what, as they said, fatten the eye of the Venezuelan government is that when oil was discovered here, and not only just any oil, but one of the newest and largest resources in the world at this point. And so, whatever greed had been there from the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, then all of a sudden, in the 21st century, the takings were even bigger than they were in 100 years ago. Because now we're talking about one of the largest and newest reserves of oil that has been found in the world thus far. And Guyana has become the fastest growing economy in the world at this point. So Guyana now is an important political player in the world, in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so Venezuela's interest, whilst historical, is now fed by greed. Let me explain something to you about the map. Where the Essequibo River is, that's where they want to take all of that in, all the way down to the bottom of Guyana, where the Essequibo River goes. But when you mark off maritime boundaries, and the maritime boundaries of Guyana have not been demarcated, although the maritime boundaries based on the land boundaries of 1899, that our oil and gas companies are within our maritime boundaries. But Venezuela wants to shift the land boundary and therefore shift the maritime boundaries. So that when you look at their map, they draw the maritime boundaries from the Essequibo River, going 2/3 across what would be left of Guyana and taking in all the oil fields that we have so far discovered. So that this is serious business, my dear friends. And therefore, what have we been doing? How have we been fighting the cause of the Guyanese people? As I said, peace and law, international law. We do not believe in unilateralism. We do not believe in one country invading another country. We've always stood for what is multilateralism, of working in unity under the United Nations. We invoke the International Court of Justice. And we're willing to take the risk to have our case heard because we believe our cause is just. We believe that we are righteous in our documents and historical records that this is our land. We have no doubt about it. I'll just remind you when we went to the International Court on the Sea in regards to the maritime boundaries with Suriname. Very expensive, lots of historical records. And we won 97% of what we claimed. Now the maritime boundaries between Guyana and Suriname had never been fixed. And that is how we resolved it. We choose the peaceful, legal, judicial, international path to solve our problems. Maduro is saying, ICJ, we don't accept them, we don't recognize them. So what's next? As I said, what he wants is to force the situation, to force us to the table. And we have said, our president has said very clearly, we're not going back to the table. We're not negotiating our land boundaries. But we've been active in diplomacy and defense diplomacy. Since we coming to office in 2020, we have worked hard as a country, as a government, to build our relations, to rebuild our relations with various regional bodies and strengthen our relations in the CARICOM, the Commonwealth, the Organization of American States, the United Nations, and also bilaterally, to bring new friends, new partners, new countries to work with us. You see the various delegations coming to Ghana to do with investment, to do with trade, that they're coming here, and we welcome them. We have friends in the world, and we also have old friends. And we have enemies that were not, persons who are enemies, but who are now our friends. And so, from the time we went to the International Court of Justice, we've been supported in statements by the UN, by the Organization of American States, by the Commonwealth, by the CARICOM. And even in the last September, when Venezuela has been ratcheting up the arguments and the noise coming from Venezuela, threats, frightening people, saying terrible things, misinforming their own people, that we have continuously had the support of these international bodies, of the regional bodies, of our friendly countries near to us, Brazil, the United States, for example, as well as other countries. And on December 3rd, yesterday, December 1st, the OAS came out, the Organization of American States came out and said Venezuela must abide by the ICJ ruling and refrain and restricted from doing anything to or threatening Ghana and its land boundaries and its administration over the country. Commonwealth came out with that, CARICOM came out with that, and you have seen, some of you may have seen the response of the Maduro government attacking these agencies, saying that they're not telling the truth. But yet to bring a new factor into what we're talking about. Oil is a new factor. Ghana's diplomacy and defense diplomacy is a new factor. The third factor is the Barbados Agreement, which came a few weeks ago. As you know, under President Trump, they brought sanctions against Venezuela. And that has contributed to life being very difficult in Venezuela for its people. So finally, they were able to reach an agreement with the Norwegians, Americans, etc., to lift some of the sanctions so that Venezuela can have more food relief and other things coming in. But there were conditions. One was that Maduro must release the political prisoners of opposition political prisoners in Venezuela. He must allow the opposition political parties to operate and to contest the elections in 2024. There must be free and fair elections, and there must be international observers. Well, as soon as that started, immediately after it was signed, we are seeing that the popular vote, that the opposition leader, who has no different view than Maduro, by the way, she believes that Essequibo belongs to them, so don't get fooled. But that she came out calling for the suspension of the referendum because the Americans might very well put back the sanctions on Venezuela and make life more difficult for the people of Venezuela, and of course to champion them to go to the ICJ and prove the case because she believes they can prove their case. So the situation is really interesting. The Barbados Agreement means that the sanctions can be reimposed if they do anything silly. The ICJ has said that Venezuela must now put their counter-arguments to Guyana in April 2024. And we believe that in the beginning of September, the part of this whole behavior was to try to withdraw from the ICJ so they would never be able to put their counter-memorial in. Because the last thing any government in Venezuela wants, whether Maduro or whoever comes after Maduro, is the ICJ to say that it upholds the 1899 arbitral tribunal, and it would therefore mean that the Venezuelan government for over 100 odd years has been fighting a losing battle, knowingly doing that. So we have the partnerships, the diplomacy, and we have us as a people. As I began saying that if there's one thing we're united on, is what is our territory and what we belong to. The indigenous people are the first people that came here, that occupied the land that is now Guyana and all of South America. And all of us have come on ships, enslaved, indentured. Some came as migrants fleeing their countries, others came as voluntary migrants coming here, but we've all come here to make the tapestry of Guyana and make it what it is. And we are proud of our country, regardless of how many times we say we criticize it. We have and we are blessed with a beautiful, wonderful, special nation that is culturally diverse, ethnically diverse, religiously diverse, ecologically diverse. We're one of the last remaining rainforests of the world, providing oxygen to the world. We are one of the countries in the world, one of the few of the countries that have 85% forest cover. Whatever we've done, good, bad, and ugly, we have reached a stage as a nation where we can be proud of who we are, and we're prepared to ensure that our territorial integrity is not tampered with, interfered with by anybody, And we say to Maduro and the Venezuelan government, go back to the ICJ, put your case, let the International Court of Justice, which is one of the highest courts in the United Nations, rule on this matter. And let us, as neighbors, live in a way that we can both benefit. The first delegation of trade to go to Venezuela was in 1958, led by Cherry Jammeh, at a time when the Mali Provo letter came out. And it was talking about trading with Venezuela, two developing countries working together. We also traded with Venezuela up to 2015 in terms of the Petrocaribe for rice barter until that concluded. That didn't go anywhere up to 2015, 2016. But there are opportunities there. And for the villages that live next to each other on the borders, our indigenous people live on both sides of the border. Trade goes on there. People live together. Families get married. There are funerals across the river for each other. These are border communities. In every part of the world, the border communities live together. So the Amerindian people of Venezuela and the Amerindian people of Guyana have, as well as all of us, had relations. But the indigenous people are worried in Venezuela too about the presence of this territorial dispute and what it will do to the way in which their communities function and function with the communities on our side of the river. And one last thing that we mustn't throw away, and that is that a mother today was on a post, very hysterical, about her son who goes to a school in Venezuela who was not being allowed to come out until he had voted tomorrow. The problem was he was 14 years old. And the age of vote in Venezuela, like in Ghana, is 18. And so Maduro may come out and say he wanted the vote. Then what is he going to do? And that is where the whole world now is watching. I want to close with just a couple of words, and that is, our cause is just. Our land boundaries of 1899 settled the issue of the land boundaries between Guyana and Venezuela 124 years ago, number one. Number two, we are not alone. We are not alone. Just as we weren't alone in 2020 elections, we're not alone this time. We are surrounded by countries and organizations that support us. And if you look at some of the things going on, the world and certain commentators are watching very carefully. The world does not want another theater of war. You have one in Gaza, Israel, you have another one in the Ukraine. They don't want one in South America or in this hemisphere. So I'm saying to you by that, you're not alone, don't be afraid, we have justice on our side. It's to say to you too, that be strong. We as a people have gone through many challenges, many trials and tribulations in our history from independence and before independence. And we have each time slowly conquered, sometimes long time. But we have won in the end. And we have showed that our perseverance, our loyalty as a people, our strength as a people, that this brings Ghana to where it is today. If we hadn't just all given up and run away from Ghana, we would not be where we are today. It is the Guyanese who have stuck it out, doggedly, perseveringly, held on and believed in Ghana, believed in this country, believed that it had a future, that is where we are today. And so we must never give up. We must never be afraid. Never be afraid. Never be afraid. What is the saying that Ghana has? Our Creole, that little axe cut down big tree. Is that the correct one? Yeah. So when you're feeling nervous, and don't be feeling nervous. There's a lot of stuff between yesterday and tomorrow. There'll be a lot of propaganda and psychological warfare coming out of Venezuela. If it's getting to you, just turn it off. You don't have to look at everything. But also, please pay attention to the government media, the Office of the President, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ghana Defense Force to give you factual information. Because the warfare that is going on is right now psychological. Not weapons, psychological, to intimidate Guyanese. So the Guyanese will say, they hope their strategy is this. The Guyanese will say to President Ali, and go down and sit down with Maduro Royale, fix the story. And we're saying we are not doing that. But as the Kubo is ours, that the whole of Ghana and all its boundaries are ours, and we will stand to defend and protect our country, every last one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister Gail Teixeira. That's a bit of history of where we are now, where we came from. And so, with that in mind, we would have heard or have a clear idea as to where we stand at the International Court of Justice. Guyana will not give up a blade of grass. We stand here together, we stand here with strength, and with good management of our country, we are again going to be victorious. And all the struggle that we're going through now and aggression from Venezuela, we will remain strong as a people. I now call on another teacher from the Bartica